I'd like to just remind you that the sign-up sheet, if you want to get the emails, the sign-up sheet is over on the counter here. I'd like to go over the open circle mission statement. We provide a place to gather for promoting harmony. We know that sometimes there are differences of opinions about the topics given, so please be tolerant and continue to create a place of harmony. Don Aitken is our speaker today. This will be his 9th annual update on global warming, climate change, and solar energy for Mexico particularly. Don has a list of credentials, but one of the things that reminded me of is that there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers, and one of the statements he shows his statistics in there of people who have become experts in their field, like Steve Jobs and who's that Microsoft guy? That they have invested approximately 20,000 hours in their work on their subjects before they really became experts in it. And I don't know how to judge Don's, but he doesn't even have a television, so he's more concentrated still on academics and his research and his work. So I'm not going to say more about that, Don, but you please come and let us go.
Try the sound level. Is this good for everybody who's in here? Good. And I have to admit, after what Jim said, it's only been 19,998 hours. I'm sorry. But I'll do my best up here today. The greatest difficulty with giving a 9th annual anything is I was 9 years younger when I did it for the first time. I hadn't even reached my 70s, so in a way I marked time with my own annual talks. Maybe I'll quit before the 30th annual, just to save everyone. Now, on this talk, I'm going to do as I did last year. First, on the previous year, I was dark and you just heard a voice come out of the dark. We're going to try it now with this, and they'll turn the rest of the lights off when we begin, so you can see the screen well. There are a number of statements, it's not all slides, because there are a number of things we have to say. And what I've done is I've made word slides as I've done before. Excuse me. And I will read those words, and it'll help people who have a hearing issue, but it'll also help people to see visually while I read it, and it helps to pace the whole thing. I thought that was better than just having the gaps and nothing and then to go on. The reason we do these annual talks is because so much happens each year, and there's so much new learning and new understanding each year that it makes it very, very interesting. When I was preparing this, I had to decide what I had to leave out. So let us begin, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you learn. So I don't know if we're turning these lights up. I think we are. Please. Good. And is this all right, so you'll be able to see me? And I can just see you. I don't know whether you want the side lights on or off. It doesn't matter to the screen. Starting as I did last year, energy is the golden thread that connects economic growth, increased social equity, and an environment that allows the world to thrive. And that was UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Ending poverty and ensuring sustainability are the defining challenges of our time. Energy is central to both. And I love this, so I put it up every year. We are like tenant farmers chopping down the fence around our house for fuel, when we should be using nature's inexhaustible sources of energy, sun, wind, and tide. Whoops, let's go back here. I put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that. And Thomas Edison in 1931. What a prescient statement. All right, here we go. Global warming, latest happenings. As Jim said, there's quite outspoken differences of opinion on this. One person came up to me and said he hoped I would not talk about global warming, it's just climate change. The fact is, it is global warming that drives climate change, and we're going to talk about both today. But first, how to begin? My friend, Dr. Jack Prince, told me last night how to begin this talk. He said, well, hold the applause for Jack too. He said, just quote Duke Ellington. It ain't the way it used to be. And I just modified it slightly. Conditions on planet Earth ain't the way they used to be. So we want to start out on the punchline. Where was last year on the scheme of warm years? And there it was. 2014 was officially now the hottest year on record. So here we go. I'm telling you, this year seems warmer than usual. The fact is that there are many people who would have been able to make the same statement and not surprised that it was our warmest year. So here's the typical plotting of all the temperatures, all the atmospheric temperatures through the years, and then we put in this year, and it's there. So it's not much warmer, but it is clearly statistically warmer. It's a 4-year upward trend. Again, we won't know until we have more statistics whether that's a real trend or another bump. But it's interesting. Another way to look at it is like this, and where we put 2014 in. So in the previous years, really, we haven't had increases. And this is the first year where we've suddenly had a measurable increase. So what's happening with global warming? Scientists said the most remarkable thing about the 2014 record was that it had occurred in a year that did not feature a strong El Nino. So here we are. There are the El Nino years. Now you know that the El Nino is the pool, it's 1,000 miles long, out in front of Peru and Ecuador, of warm water that every now and then conditions conspire to develop that warm pool. And that pool is so large that it delivers heat to the atmosphere and really influences the measured temperature of the atmosphere. And there are the 4 El Nino years that clearly bumped up the Earth's temperature. But here is this year without an El Nino. So this appears to be purely what's just developing in the atmosphere. So here's the year that was. Extreme heat blanketed Alaska and much of the western United States last year. Heat records were set across large areas of every inhabited continent. Several European countries set temperature records. Bouts of extreme heat on land are on the rise. And this is interesting to see now. The 2 black curves represent the temperature of the atmosphere in what we call the hiatus. That's really pretty well leveled for several years, a number of years. But the upper brown line and curve represents the number of heat extremes on land globally. And they've just been continuing, even though the measured temperature in the atmosphere has not changed, which shows you that the heat is there. But what's happening, or been happening, is the heat has been doing different things from just warming the atmosphere. The ocean surface was unusually warm, virtually everywhere except around Antarctica, providing the energy that fueled damaging Pacific storms. Now this is important to see, the change in the Earth's total heat content, because the blue is the amount of heat contained in the ocean, and the red is the amount of heat contained on land, in the atmosphere, and through ice heating. It's very important to know what a small proportion of global heating ends up in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is what we are measuring each year. So it doesn't take much of a perturbation, and everybody believes it's the ocean, to change that such that the atmospheric heat ends up going in the ocean. For example, there's been a measured increase in the trade winds, and it's been stirring up the ocean more than usual, and if you stir it up, you have more surface area for absorbing heat. There are things like that that are happening. But as we talk about the global warming and the temperature, remember that atmospheric is a very small part of the storage. This is the recent period when the global atmospheric temperature did not increase. And the energy and temperature of the oceans did increase. So certainly a lot of heat was going into them. The ocean surface was unusually warm virtually everywhere. I said that. Still, West Antarctic glaciers have reached unstoppable melting, even though Antarctic area was cooler this year, and there's some expansion of the surface floating ice on one side. And this is a picture that just came out from Science magazine, showing in recent years the flow of the glaciers, which is the red. The red is proportional to the flow of the glaciers into the ocean is largely accelerated, which exacerbates melting. So even though there's more ice growing on the surface area of the eastern Antarctic, the rate of ice loss on the western Antarctic greatly exceeds it, and there's a net loss happening. All 10 of the hottest years on record have come after 1998. 2014 was the 38th consecutive year with an anomalously high annual global temperature, according to the World Meteorological Association. So if you group the decades as we do, and group the temperatures in the decades, there's no question that there has been a very definite trend of warming over several decades. It's an unabated trend. Now this just came out, and what this shows, it shows what they call the 2014 temperature anomaly, and what they've done is they've taken the average temperature here, between here, and compared the 2014 temperature around the world with this average temperature. So you see that the red areas, and especially the dark areas up north, where it's warming faster than anything else, are decidedly warmer than they had been during that 30-year period. The Earth is now warmer than it has been in the last 3 million years. Every now and then you're going to recognize slides you saw last year, which help, but I think it's still an amazing statistic. So what's interesting here, in part, is to look very carefully at, this is what I want to do, is to look very carefully at the actual temperatures as plotted on the bottom. And so here it is, it's a little fuzzy. But if I put a line, as I did last year, that the global warming tends to be bumpy. It goes up, then it levels. And in the last 3 years, we do see evidence of a possible new trend. Again, we won't know until we've had some more years of statistics. But it's very suggestive that we've entered now a new trend. The year that was, of the large land areas where many people live, only the eastern portion of the U.S. recorded below average temperatures in 2014, in sharp contrast to the unusual heat in the west. And I'm going to talk more about this. I'm actually going to show the mechanism that caused that. But everybody remembers that it was cold out east, and everybody out east in the U.S. was saying, to heck with global warming, we're freezing this winter. And if you look at the map, there it is. And you can see the hotter area on the west, and you see the cooler area in the central and eastern part of the United States. And what you see is there are only 2 spots, plus Antarctic, that experience that cooler weather. All the rest of the globe experienced warmer weather. And that's why, even though it was much colder in the central and eastern U.S., overall, the global temperature could rise. California hit record high temperatures, inducing one of the worst droughts in history. Let's take a more detailed look at California. Here's the increasing temperature of California. The straight line is not the way it really goes. This is kind of the way it goes. I showed these in detail last year. And that's what we call the hiatus. So as the global atmospheric temperature leveled, it did in California as well, until the last 3 years. And now the temperature is rising steadily for 3 years in California to very, very high levels. No more hiatus for California. All right, part 2, climate change, its relation to the Earth's temperature and some of the latest happenings. The name climate change is so boring. I don't know how many of you read Andy Borowitz. If you do, you'll be aware of what I'm going to do here. He suggests changing it to something that the public will pay attention to. And in the meantime, it's warm up here. It's not global warming, it's me. New Haven, the Borowitz report, after a report from the Yale Center on Climate Change Communications, showed that the term climate change elicits relatively little concern from the American public. Leading scientists are recommending replacing it with a new term. Here's one: you will be burnt to a crisp and die. Well, here's another one: your cities will be ravaged by tsunamis and floods. or Earth will be a fiery hellhole incapable of supporting human life. I know there are people who may believe that. Okay, let's stay with the name. But take a saner look at what's happening, and it's not pretty. And so I'm going to start again with California. The California heat this year is like nothing ever seen in modern temperature records. Here it is. It ranks worst in at least the last 1,200 years. We can't really tell reliably behind that. You can see how concentrated it is in the west. Just how bad has California's drought been? Modern measurements already showed it's been drier than the 30s Dust Bowl, worse than historic droughts of the 70s and 80s. New research going back further than the Viking conquests still can't find a drought as bad as this one. And it's come on very fast. Here it is over the last 3 years. So it's been building and coming on systematically. And notice the curve that we gave before. These are the 3 years where the temperature is increasing monotonically. And that seems to have triggered the drought. And it's bad. These are the reservoirs that people count on for drinking water. It's a pretty bad situation. One of the oddities of this drought is that conditions aren't just driven by a lack of rainfall. What makes this drought exceptional is the heat, extreme heat. And there it is, 3 years in a row. The climate change is the drought. That's the climate change. But it is driven by the heat. Higher temperatures increase evaporation and help deplete reservoirs and groundwater. It may cost the state $2.2 billion this year, with 17,000 jobs lost, 428,000 acres of land left unplanted. Well, let's go back out to the whole United States right now, and let's look at a different statistic. And that's the change in the maximum number of consecutive dry days. And where you see the dark brown, there's a 20% increase now in the maximum number of consecutive dry days. And there's Mexico, folks. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about Mexico this time because we are right in the middle of it. We're almost the canary for the rest of the world. Despite a plateau in mean global temperature, there's a clear rise in the area of land experiencing more than 30 days of harsh heat a year. It's even clearer with the number of regions experiencing more than 50 days in a row of severe heat. The results show that it would be erroneous to interpret the recent slowdown of the global annual mean temperature, the atmospheric temperature increase, as a general slowdown of climate change. When we don't have droughts, the Earth is experiencing increasing flooding. This means that when it rains, it will rain harder. It also means that a great deal more energy will be released into the atmosphere as water vapor condenses into rain. Now here the observed changes in the United States in very heavy precipitators. All except Hawaii are positive and very positive for the eastern and northeastern area where we're getting much more and many more heavy rains. It doesn't mean we're getting more rainfalls. They're just heavier. And if we plot that as a trend, you'll see that those numbers are increasing in the same steady increasing. So things are steadily happening and changing in an upward level. Now, if you look at other natural catastrophes worldwide, the red is like earthquakes and so on, and that really hasn't changed. But the other two are meteorological and hydrological. And you will see that there's been an absolutely steady increase of major storms, rainfalls, windstorms, and so on. This is the time that the global atmospheric temperature did not increase, but the major storms worldwide continued to increase. So the heat was there. It's doing its work. Hurricanes, while not more frequent, will draw more heat and moisture from the warming ocean surface and become stronger and wetter. Both have been observed. Here's the ocean temperature of last May 30, 2014. The orange color is above optimal temperatures to create hurricanes. There's Mexico. So, what happened? Hurricane Amanda, May 25th, spinning southwest of Manzanillo. The storm's winds reached 155 miles an hour over Memorial Day, securing it a place in the record books as the strongest hurricane ever seen in the world in May since we started keeping records. And it hit Mexico. On average, the first eastern Pacific tropical storm doesn't form until June 10. And the first hurricane blows on the scene around June 26th. And it was pretty bad, even in Mexico City, where the hurricane came way ashore. It's not a happy time for those who are in it. The second named storm, Tropical Storm Boris, also caused flooding rains in Mexico. In September, Hurricane Odile hit the western coastal state of Baja with 115-mile-an-hour winds and torrential rains, destroying houses and leaving many people without electricity. So there is Hurricane Odile coming in, as it's just coming up to the southern tip of Baja, you see in that picture. And it was bad. It left an awful lot of damage, as you've all read about, and it left an awful lot of flooding. It used to be a gas station until the winds went through. This used to be the front of a resort hotel. What happened to the people who came there for the lovely sunny weather? That's what they had to do during the hurricane. They were not happy. Oh, what a wonderful vacation this has been. So Mexico got more hits and more damage done than anywhere else in the world during last year. The Mexican government estimated that the annual average cost of disasters was $2.1 billion. Between that period, about 3 times the annual average that used to be registered between 80 and 99. Mexico is where all of the action is. That came out of the science article, or in the vernacular is where all of the action is at, however you'd like to say it. All right, part 3, climate change. Can we understand some of how and why this is all happening? You remember that I'm a scientist, and I really like to explain things, and I like to understand things. So what can we determine from all of this? It is in climate change, not just measured global temperatures, that we currently find the greatest evidence for the continual and increasing impacts of global warming. Let's consider a growing theory about what's going on. This is the jet stream. It's a picture actually off of New Zealand, but you can actually see some clouds are forming along the jet stream. Let's talk about that. Jet stream waviness is now known to increase extreme weather. Well, we showed this 2 years ago when Hurricane Sandy came into the United States, and I went over very carefully all the routes of the hurricanes and showed how Sandy was very different. There's Sandy just striking the eastern United States. Its unique path suddenly took a hook to the left, suddenly. Unlike all of the other hurricanes which had smooth paths, they tend to go like that. If it had continued on its path like other hurricanes, it would have missed the U.S. entirely. The huge damage was caused because of this abrupt change in path. Why did it? That's why it did. The jet stream was forced downward, a great loop downward, had a low pressure area to the right of the jet stream, and that set up an area of force where it pushed Sandy into the coast. So it was that bulge in the jet stream that caused Sandy to suddenly turn and come into the coast. The warm air from the exposed water in the Arctic Ocean was shown to alter those air currents, the jet stream, which led to the depression of the jet stream, which led to Sandy coming into the coast. So jet stream waviness increases extreme weather. What makes it wave? This came out last month. This is last month's Scientific American, and they had an article in it, Extreme Weather Becomes the Norm, which explains this. A radical jet stream, delivers extreme weather. 2 jets of high altitude wind blow around the Earth in each hemisphere. When bends in the polar jet become magnified, warm or cold air can come down and wallop regions of a continent. The bends can also get stuck that way for weeks, causing droughts, floods, heat waves, and even freezes. So let's look at this. The formation of the polar vortex and its cause of the frigid winter in the US and Europe. The spinning polar vortex winds typically trap the cold air in the Arctic. But the problem occurs when the polar vortex weakens or splits apart. These are actual satellite pictures, so this is what happened. Essentially flinging these cold wind patterns out of the Arctic and into our backyards. So there's the central and eastern United States, and there's Europe with the cold Arctic winds coming down and blanketing the countries. And that's how it looked. You see that purple area where that bulge from the Arctic winds came down and really froze us. Let's look more closely at what appears to be going on to try to understand why climate extremes have become more frequent. Well, let's talk about the jet stream for a second. The atmosphere has got major circulation, what we call cells. There are 3 in the northern hemisphere and 3 in the southern hemisphere. The northern ones are called the Hadley, the Ferrel, and the polar cell. Now you'll see that the air goes up, goes across, it cools, it comes down, and these are the great atmospheric currents. Now, where you've got one cell with the air going up and the other cell going down, you have a pressure difference. And that's where the jet streams are formed. They're formed to equalize the pressure between the cells. So now you know where jet streams come from. Now, decreased Arctic sea ice and slowed high-altitude winds can cause jet stream bends. And you will see here that this is the period where the atmospheric temperature stayed stable, and yet the Arctic sea ice continued to melt. Similarly, slower high-altitude winds can create jet stream bends. And again, we have that, and this is the period where temperature did not seem to increase, and the high-altitude winds did increase. So here's how it looks. There's the polar vortex. The positive phase is linked to a large pressure difference, which helps the jet stream take a straight path. Round it goes normally. Now, this is 1979 and 2012. You're looking at the Earth. The blue is the coldest air. The brown is the next coldest air, and you'll see it goes down over the United States. In 1979, we had faster autumn winds down below. In 2012, the entire upper area, Arctic area, is about 3 degrees centigrade, 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. That's been warming faster and holding its heat more than any other place in Earth, except for Siberia area, the very northern areas. About 1 degree warmer actually laps down, that's the rest of the Earth, actually. So a negative phase is linked to the small pressure difference, which weakens the jet stream, so big bends are now more likely, and weakens the polar vortex, allowing the cold air to come down south. So there we are in that situation. Now here we've got this picture, and this is actually the United States. So the left-hand circle covers the western United States, and the right-hand circle covers the central and the eastern United States. And you will see that the western United States is unusual heat, the central and eastern part of the United States is unusual cold, all at the same time. That explains this phenomenon and how it happened. So dynamically, we're beginning to understand now what's going on. Occasionally, the bends known as Rossby waves can get stuck in place and locking in long periods of extreme weather. Anyone who points to this cold, long winter as evidence that global warming is a myth may be confusing these kinds of unpredictable short-term weather patterns with the long-term and global behavior of the atmosphere. Where you live may have seen a lot of snow this year, but when scientists look at the whole planet, this past decade is still the hottest on record. I heard there's going to be another polar vortex this winter. Where are you going? If I hurry, I'll make Costa Rica by Thanksgiving. Climate change, part 4. What appear to be the drivers of global warming and climate change? Oop, mistake. Don't do that. Get out of there. All right, that's what we want. This is a curve that we've seen often. It only happens to go to 2010. But it's the atmospheric carbon dioxide that's been measured in a very pure place of pure air on top of Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And the atmospheric carbon dioxide has been increasing dramatically over many, many years. Well, where do we go from 2010 to this year? That's where we are now. So for the first time, we hit 400 parts per million. We hit it last year a little bit, and now it's solidly in there. So we're constantly increasing the load of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We've added 40% more carbon dioxide than what had been the natural level before we started pouring it into the air. How does this happen? The CO2 is increasing because all uses of energy end up with emissions into the environment, mostly the air. And here's a couple of interesting statistics. The weight of the emissions from the automobile exhaust is 3 times heavier than the weight of the gas in the tank before it's burned. When you burn 1 gallon of gas, about 7 pounds, 20 pounds of CO2 goes out the tailpipe. And people will say, how can that be? What you're doing when you're burning is you're burning with oxygen. You're combining carbon with oxygen. And so you're pulling the oxygen in, CO2, you've got the extra weight of the oxygen attached to the carbon that comes out. And so it's really quite amazing. Every gallon you burn, 20 pounds comes out. The Earth is normally at energy equilibrium, where the energy delivered to the Earth by the sun is exactly balanced by the energy reflected off of clouds, aerosols, water, ice, and land, as well as delivered to space as infrared radiation. We know this to be true, for even if a tiny fraction more of the sun's energy was absorbed rather than reflected and re-emitted, the Earth would long ago have become an unlivable furnace. We also know this to be true, for even if a tiny fraction more of the sun's energy was reflected rather than absorbed, the Earth would long ago have become an unlivable ball of ice. It's exactly balanced over time. You get little perturbations with volcanoes and things. So now we look at the atmospheric carbon dioxide, but it's not just carbon dioxide. Here's the things that we're putting into the air from the activities that we're doing. Certainly carbon dioxide from burning our fossil fuels. Methane comes from our agriculture. It comes from rice paddies. It comes primarily from the increase in animals, which is undelicately referred to as cow farts. But in any case, we have CFCs, that's in our air conditioning system, that's just from our industry. We have more ozone coming out of cars. We have more nitrous oxide coming out of cars. And all of those, if you see by those little yellow arrows, all of those are the kinds of materials put into the atmosphere that will absorb the heat and reflect it downward. All of those. And those are all caused by human activity. So the very precise energy balance to and from Earth has been changed. The result can be concluded the Earth has changed. It has to, in response. So where are all those greenhouse gases coming from? Now there's always quite a controversy. Did human beings have anything to do with the global warming? Well, you start with the increase in carbon dioxide, and what you find with the orange curve is 280 parts per million of CO2 in the air is historically what we had. And then we started burning on the blue curve. We started burning fossil fuels and emitting CO2 into the air. And we know very accurately how much CO2 came, because we know quite accurately how much fossil fuels we've been burning over all those years. And you will see that the CO2 from the fossil fuels has been increasing, and has become the very clear driver of the total CO2 in the whole atmosphere. And we are the ones who burn the fossil fuels. We are causing the increase in the global atmospheric CO2. Anthropogenic means human emissions. So there's no argument whatsoever at this point. The argument that still rages occasionally is, okay, but maybe it has nothing to do with global warming, and maybe that has nothing to do with humans. That gets increasingly doubtful with time. As we look at this, there are other indicators. On the top left corner, carbon dioxide increasing as we've gone into the industrial age, but also nitrous oxides increasing as we've gotten more and more automobiles on the road. Methane increasing as we've gone to our huge farms and our feedlots and things of that sort. And even sulfate aerosols, which are little bits of carbon, as measured in the green and ice, they're increasing, and they actually reduce the radiation coming in. They reflect it out. But the carbon dioxide is from our actions, the nitrous oxide is obviously from our actions, the methane is obviously from our actions. And those are the elements in the atmosphere that are causing the imbalance. Well, who are the world's largest CO2 emitters? Not surprise here, no surprise here. China first, USA second, Europe third. And here's another one that shows it's not just China now, but look at the rate of increase of putting CO2 in the air by what China has been doing in building coal-fired power plants at an incredibly fast rate. And as we project the energy use in these various countries for China, US, and India, China is projected to need more and more energy, so they'll have to build more and more power plants. will have a modest increase, and India is coming up with significant increase. 86% of all the energy use in the world comes from fossil fuels. Is this sustainable? Well, there's the fossil fuel from global energy consumption by fuel types. Here is 67% of the U.S. production of electricity is from fossil fuels. 73% of the Mexican production of electricity is from fossil fuels. Machines digging for brown coal in front of a power plant in Germany, just sort of symbolic of what's going on. And when we talk about the impacts of the coal-fired power plants, this is not just CO2. There's an enormous human health impact and quality of life impacts. China's been paying a huge price for that, as we've been reading about. But India is paying more and more of a price as well. And we've been paying a price too in the United States. Other things are happening. Shells dissolve if you acidify ocean water. What's happening? Well, what it shows is the rise in atmospheric CO2 is the green, causes CO2 to dissolve in the water. That leads to a rising concentration of CO2, which is the red, in the surface of the ocean, and that produces acid. And consequently, we're getting a decrease in the pH of the ocean as the surface down to several hundred meters is becoming acidified. Some scientists now state that the reduction in ocean pH could be the greatest ecological hazard from the additional CO2 accumulating in the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels. So when we talk about cutting back on burning fossil fuels and going to alternatives like renewable energy and solar, it gives many, many, many more benefits than just reducing CO2. Well, let's talk about oil just for a minute. Here's the great oilaholics between China and the United States. The totality of society's oil dependence. Oil is 70% of oil is used for transportation, and 90% of transportation fuel is oil. That's not a surprise, right? 95% of all goods in shops involve oil. 95% of all of our food products involve oil. To grow one cow and deliver it to your plate takes 6 barrels of oil. Everything pictured here, except the children and the house, right, was made from oil-based polymers. Everything, all the clothing, all the things in the yard, all the jars and containers and everything made from oil-based polymers. Well, we have to realize that our insatiable thirst for oil has pretty serious global consequences since we get so much from developing nations and they are handling their own people and their own environments incredibly badly to satiate our thirst for oil. A brief aside here, since we've been hearing about oil prices, I thought I would just show you a little bit. Oil prices were $110 a barrel in July. In December, they had come down to $67 a barrel. In this month, they had come down to $49 a barrel. Mexico is selling oil on the open market at $38.62 a barrel. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. All the pundits, nobody predicted this would happen, but you can't. Oil prices go up and down, triggered by crazy things. One of the things that's triggered it, of course, is the great further amount of oil that the U.S. is now developing through all of our fracking. And meanwhile, the oil producers are refusing to reduce their amount of oil production. You know that OPEC has decided not to come back on that. So the glut on the earth is becoming great. And it became very clear with that glut that we just had to sell it. They just had to sell the stuff. This is astonishing. Let me go back with a couple of statistics. Oh, there, just a moment. A couple of statistics on that. Gasoline was $4 a gallon in the United States up till like $3.80 up till the middle of June. It's now selling for $1.95 in the Midwestern U.S. The average family in the U.S. will save $750 a year from reduced gas costs. And people who use heating oil will save $3,000 a year. And they will spend that back into the economy. And it will be a great stimulus because people spend money in stores That's good. Now you come across the border to Mexico. Mexico started a few years ago to try to equalize the gasoline cost with the United States. They wanted parity. So they gradually increased the cost, and today you're paying $3.56 a U.S. gallon by liter equivalent, if you will, for gasoline in Mexico, while it's down below $2 in the U.S. And if the government manages to back down from 14.5 exchange rate to 13.3, which is what they want to do, then Mexicans will be paying just under $4 a gallon, while we in the U.S. are spending less than $2 a gallon. We're hitting these poor Mexicans hard and giving the affluent people in the U.S. a free ride. And there's something fundamentally wrong about that. Where do we go from here? Here's what we have before us. Climate change does appear to be happening across the globe. The evidence appears to suggest that global warming provides that extra energy to cause the change in climate. And the evidence appears to be that greenhouse gases are causing this energy imbalance. Further, the evidence appears to be that human activities are the major producers of the greenhouse gases, and hence the secondary effects of global warming and climate change. I keep using the word appears to be because there's no such thing as scientific certainty, but there's certainly a lot to be understood by what we're saying. The latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report puts the probability now at 95 to 100% certainty that humans have caused this. And it takes a lot of scientists to list anything that's certain. There's an awful lot of scientific evidence to support these assertions. The number of papers and research projects in global warming have been growing substantially over the years. You're in the thousands on the right-hand side. And so a survey was taken of all the papers that you see here from 1991 to 2012. And there were 13,950 peer-reviewed climate articles in that period. Only 24 projected global warming. Now this turns out to be one of the areas where people like to attack, because they will say, yes, all the scientists are climbing on the bandwagon. They're getting research to show that we have global warming. They can get federal funds as long as they keep showing that there's global warming. And that's a very, very cynical view. I am a scientist. I used to have federal funds and foundation funds and so on, and that just doesn't cut it. Scientists are not, 14,000 are not all being paid in order to give the wrong answer. So there's my comment on that. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon addressing the U.S. Conference of the Parties just 2 weeks before last year's Open Circle talk. I gave it in December last year. I used to give my annual talks in November. Then I moved to December last year, and then I moved it to January this year on purpose, so I can know the statistics for the previous year. The delegates from 189 countries a year ago attempted to negotiate a new climate agreement for 2015, which is to replace the Kyoto Accord of '97. First, they agreed to a global carbon budget to stay within a 2-degree sea temperature rise. This is sort of a made-up number, but we're 1 degree centigrade warmer now. And scientists feel that possibly we can tolerate 1 more degree without really triggering many, many more runaway climate effects. And that means that humans could have, we've already put 1 trillion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, and you could put up to another 1 trillion tons. Well, we're already failing that target, because if we'd followed this target, it would have been around the middle of this century, and right now it looks like we're going to reach that by 2030. We are increasing the rate of CO2 into the atmosphere. Well, what this says is something startling. Most of remaining coal and oil should stay underground. If nations want even a 50% chance of avoiding dangerous global warming, they'll have to keep 80% of current coal reserves in the ground, according to a new climate study. In the US, more than 90% of coal reserves would need to stay buried. In the Middle East, producers would have to forego 38% of oil, 61% of gas. If you're saying no chance in hell at this point, I'm about to agree with you, but let me finish. China and India would close off 66% of their coal. Former Soviet states would have to keep 94% of their coal underground, all so that we wouldn't put in more than another 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide. The estimates may be entirely reasonable, but the implications are wholly impracticable under current political and economic conditions. To paraphrase Duke Ellington and Dr. Jack Prince, this just ain't going to happen. So, first, what is Paris 2015 that we're talking about? That's when, in December this year, and why it'll be January of next year if I do give a 10th annual, where the world's nations, when they'll meet and where is Paris, to adopt the agreement that will replace the 1997 Kyoto Accord to limit the emissions of CO2. This is huge. 194 nations just finished the final pre-Paris meeting, and every nation, large and small, agreed to participate. That's never happened before. An agreement was reached that each nation would determine its own CO2 reduction. So nobody is imposing on you, you're going to reduce that much, you're going to reduce that much. That was one of the failings of the Kyoto Accord. No, you decide how much you think you can do, and come on in with that to Paris. But then, make it binding. Because this is an agreement, not a treaty, the U.S. can sign on without the need for congressional approval. So, I've really been cautioned to keep this as unpolitical as possible. This agreement was made possible by the historic U.S.-China agreement to limit CO2 emissions. Yes, I know. The Chinese really didn't give up anything other than to say that they would level off their emissions by 2030, while the U.S. set firm targets of lowering the CO2 emissions to 20% below 1990 levels by 2030. So what's the big deal? The fact that the two largest holdouts from the Kyoto Accord, China and the U.S., refused to take part in it. Now agreed, and the two largest emitters of carbon dioxide now agreed to participate in the new accord, was the defining action that opened the door for all of the other nations to agree. So where do we go from here? First, on the national level, there has to be a bipartisan governmental will to proceed, backed up by the will of the people. It's going to take a lot of doing. Let's see what a famous Mexican atmospheric scientist has to say about that. You've all heard about Mario Molina, who got the Nobel Prize for his pioneering discovery of the ozone hole over the Antarctic, and then determining that it was created by the human emissions of CFCs, and that got him the Nobel Prize. A great Mexican scientist. Here's a quote. 97% of economists and scientists agree that effective measures can be taken to reduce carbon emissions without affecting economic growth. The idea that sustainability is expensive is false, said Dr. Molina. Dr. Molina also stated, unlike the United States, the issue of climate change has not become politicized in Mexico, which has allowed the country to better confront the problem. Now, I have just 2 slides where I want to just say a couple of things, and very gently. A new study from Duke University finds that people will evaluate scientific evidence based on whether they view its policy implications as politically desirable. If they don't, they tend to disbelieve the science in order to deny that the problem exists. Mooney concludes, the one who did the study, concludes with this point. It's very useful to bear in mind that often when we appear to be debating science and facts, what we're really disagreeing about is something very different. And I just hope everyone in this room keeps that in mind. And the people who wrote some very, very nasty emails to Jim Spivey for even daring to put me up in front of you, I wish that they would also begin to understand how emotionally colored this is, and how it's so much more than just believing in the science and climate change. The mission statement that the Open Circle does not endorse what the speakers say is true, and speakers are allowed to say what they feel is appropriate. I'm doing my level best to be as objective as I can, scientifically and technically, to all of you here today. So how do we proceed to develop a responsible energy and sustainability policy for an entire country? Fossil fuels are projected still to account for 50% of global energy consumption by 2035, and to be about the same total amount 2013 as they are now. This just must not continue. And yet we know the nations are not going to just back off and leave it on the ground unless there are attractive alternatives to burning the fossil fuels. Where do we go from here? It's clear that we need to move to an energy system and sources that don't yield the global greenhouse gases. This means energy efficiency, renewable energy, supportive government policies, and a supportive public. Will this cost our economy a lot to accomplish? U.S. Chamber of Commerce is claiming that the EPA's new carbon emission regulations would cost the U.S. economy $50.2 billion per year. Well, a lot of money. But the fact is that the US boasts a $17 trillion economy, so 51 billion amounts to 1/3 of 1%. And as Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman went on to say, to write, to take meaningful action against one of the greatest threats to the nation's people, environment, and economy. The US could transition to a 2050 economy energized by triple efficiency, 75% renewable energy, for a $5 trillion net present value savings, not net cost. Because energy efficiency is an enormous energy savings, while supporting a 158% bigger US economy and slashing carbon emissions to 82 to 86% below year 2000 levels. This is technically and economically feasible. And this just shows one thing. The red curve shows that as California doubled its GDP from 1971 until 2009, its electricity consumption per capita stayed absolutely low. And they were able to show that you can power an increase in GDP with energy efficiency, so they didn't have to put more CO2 in the air. They saved the money on the power plants. The blue curve is the rest of the United States that has not caught up with realizing you can use energy efficiency instead of creating new power plants. The importance of local leadership in responding to climate change. California Governor Jerry Brown in his January 5th inaugural speech. We will increase from 1/3 to 50% in California our electricity derived from renewable resources. We're pushing 30% now. Reduce today's petroleum use in cars and trucks by up to 50%. Double the efficiency of existing buildings and make heating fuels cleaner. Those are the goals of the California governor. The European Union leads in setting CO2 goals. It continues to lead by example. The 28 members agreed in October of this last year to cut Europe-wide greenhouse gas emissions by at least 40% by 2030. Europe has already made impressive progress. European Union greenhouse gas emissions were 18% below 1990 levels, just shy of their 20% threshold. Yes, some of that is influenced by an economy that's having great difficulty as well, no question. But most of it is influenced by policies. So we know by example of major industrial nations that greenhouse gases can be lowered without harming the economy. Here's Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the United States. And he said, what now? If governments are unwilling to lead when leadership is required, people must. We need a global grassroots movement that tackles climate change and its fallout. Well, here's the first huge one that we had, and I thought you'd like to see a few pictures. The People's Climate March in New York City in September 21 of last year, and it was emulated also in Paris and Madrid and in many other places. Their charts for inviting people to it are really quite amusing. Okay, there they are, 400,000 people gathered near Columbus Circle before the start of the march. They are all marching together saying we would like the government and Congress to pay attention to something that we the people think is very important. Here's New York City down 6th Avenue. Here's between 8th and 9th Avenues. Very, very impressive. Here's in Central Park South. And carrying signs that state what they believe. We can't burn all the oil on the planet and still live on it. Cut carbon pollution, unlock clean energy. Well, there's a very appropriate statement. From rallying public opinion to exerting moral authority. Look who? Pope Francis's climate plans for 2015. A picture of him with a scientist that he invited into the Vatican meeting on sustainable development in May. In May, he held the conference. It was called Sustainable Humanity, Sustainable Nature, Our Responsibility. The Pope will publish a rare encyclical on climate change and human ecology, urging all Catholics to take action on moral as well as scientific grounds. The document will be sent to the world's 5,000 Catholic bishops, 400,000 priests, who will distribute it to the 1.2 billion parishioners. And this is the Pope's quote, and clearly frames. Now, there'll be some people who don't agree with it, but this is what's going to be behind the encyclical. Today, solid scientific evidence exists that global climate change is changing, and that human activity based on the use of fossil materials contributes decisively to this trend. If current trends continue, this century will witness unprecedented climate change and the destruction of the ecosystem with tragic consequences for us all. I'm wiggling a lot because I have a cramp in my back. And then he ends up with a message of hope and joy. A healthier, safer, fairer, more prosperous, and more sustainable world is within our reach. He's an extraordinary person, whether one believes in religion or is atheist or whatever. The fact is that this has been an amazing man to come upon the scene and what he has been doing for long necessary policy. Fossil fuel versus renewable energy subsidies. I shouldn't have put it here, but here it is. Fossil fuel subsidies come to about $550 billion a year. Subsidies renewables about $121 billion. You keep those in mind. Let's go. Transitioning nations to renewable energy. I'm going to repeat some of what I presented last year here, and I won't go into nearly as much detail as I did last year. But can renewable energy realistically provide for almost all the power needs of an entire country? First, a completely renewable power sector is technically feasible. And this is from the Electricity Journal, which is the official journal of all of the producers of electricity in the United States. That includes nuclear, fossil fuel, everything. Okay, and this is from their professional journal. A completely renewable power sector is technically feasible. There are no sound technical reasons why existing renewable power plants could not replace all conventional units. It is clearly feasible to replace the present fossil fuel energy infrastructure with renewables, says the entire industry. Second, a renewable power sector would offer immense benefits to consumers, utilities, and societies. Wind and solar PV systems use virtually no water. They only need about a 600th as much water per unit of electricity produced as nuclear plants, for example. Only a 500th as much water as coal units, a 250th as much as natural gas facilities. We've got droughts, we've got problems with water. This is certainly helpful. About 50 cents for every dollar expended on conventional electricity leaves the local economy. And in some areas, 80 to 90% of the cost of energy leaves local economies because you buy the electricity resources, either electricity from out of state, or you buy the resources to make the electricity from out of state, send the money out, you don't have it for the state economy. Every dollar invested in renewable electricity can produce at least $1.40 of local economic gain. Renewable energy technologies are 2 to 24 times more effective on a per kilowatt hour basis at mitigating the risks of climate change than other sources of electricity. So we began already in 2008, Scientific American, coming out with articles like this, a grand plan for solar energy. By 2050, it could free the U.S. from foreign oil and slash greenhouse emissions. Here's how. Well, conclusion for that was written by Professor Mark Jacobson and Mark Delucci, both professors at Stanford University, where I used to be. Supplies of wind and solar energy on accessible land dwarf the energy consumed by people around the globe. The cost of generating and transmitting power would be less than the projected cost per kilowatt hour for fossil fuel and nuclear power. By early 2013, at least 138 countries had renewable energy targets in place. The green. And here it is also in the brown. Same thing, policy maps. It's spreading now worldwide that it's a good thing to develop renewable energy. So here came Scientific American now in 2009, just a year later, a plan for a sustainable future, how to get all of the energy from wind, water, and solar power by 2030. So these are legitimate models that are coming out. America has installed 22 times more solar in 2014 than in 2008. Solar has risen unabated in a post-recession economy, growing from just a few hundred megawatts to 5,700. A nuclear power plant is 1,000 megawatts. So that's how much we've already got, almost 6 nuclear power plants equivalent. Photovoltaic panels may be the world's main power source by 2070. The source of that statement? Royal Dutch Shell. That's an oil company, folks. In fact, it's Europe's largest oil company that's making that prediction along with everyone else. Those things that we have in our roofs here may be the world's greatest power source by 2070. PV panels last a long time, too, so don't worry about that. Mexico, and now much of this is a repeat of what I did last year, this last part of it, but I don't know how many people did not come last year, and I would like to because it's so important for Mexico. I'd like to repeat this. Mexico has an extraordinary renewable energy resource base that can power a complete energy transition for the entire country. It has more consistent renewable energy density, more favorable countrywide distribution of renewable energy sources than either the United States or Germany. The potential in Mexico for making electricity from solar energy is enormous, the third largest in the world, many, many times larger than the potential for all other energy sources. Unlike the other sources, solar energy is available everywhere in Mexico. The sun shines everywhere in Mexico. Well, that little square that you see with the yellow arrow above, if we installed photovoltaic panels with today's efficiency, the ones that we can buy, that's how much territory it would take to provide the electricity for the entire country. Obviously, you're not going to do it in one place like that, but it begins to show the power of the resource that we have. This is being built right now. Finally, Mexico is building large utility-scale solar systems. 30 megawatts, huge, in South Baja under a 20-year purchase agreement with CFE. And what Mexico has done with its new laws is it's encouraged CFE to build some, but it's now made allowable for businesses to build their own energy, solar energy systems, to plug it into their own businesses, and CFE has to let them plug it into CFE. So 2/3 of all the new systems being built in Mexico now are being built by industries for themselves to reduce their own bills. And this has been the real breakthrough in Mexico. It has the highest wind energy potential in the world, as we recall. Now, I went in great detail last year, and I won't this time, but this is my own plan, and I developed it last year. If you divide Mexico into 10 regions, and if you combine the renewable resources in each of the regions, you can end up with 10 basically energy-independent regions, all with renewable energy, powered by renewable energy in Mexico. And then what you can do is you can connect them with transmission lines, so when the sun isn't shining here, but it's shining there, you can pick up some of that. When the wind isn't blowing there, but it's blowing here, they can pick up some of that. And it levelizes the intermittency. Okay? And then you have a lot of connections coming. That Mexico needs on the right. It's amazing. So what have we seen here? Mexico could become almost, if not completely, energy independent using its own renewable energy sources. Think what that means. All of the money for energy would stay in Mexico. It would buy new Mexican energy industries and hundreds of thousands of new jobs. Now, this is a new one. Here's showing the installed wind and solar in Mexico. You can see there are only two major solar areas, plants in Mexico, and the one in Baja is the one I just showed you. It's under construction now. And then down in the south, in Oaxaca area, you've got the wind development. But here now are the ones that are under development in Mexico. And the remarkable thing is you don't have to concentrate them like in the southwestern United States where we have the strongest solar, because Mexico has strongest solar everywhere. So they can put them near the load centers where they need to do. Now, I didn't copy one. There's also a similar one for new wind systems being developed in the state. The problem we have is still the same problem I pointed out last year. Meanwhile, CFE is totally ignoring all of that, and they're planning to put new fossil fuel combined cycle generation plants, fossil fuel power plants wherever you see those yellow X's, which is that. I showed this last year. If CFE goes ahead and does that, they will be putting new gas-fired power plants in every one of those 10 regions, and you can forget about the renewable energy plant. So somehow it has to get through, and it's not there yet by a long shot. To close out this talk, but then I have some closing things I want to show you. It's important to note that Mexico's renewable energy transition doesn't have to rely just on very large central renewable energy systems. You've seen this before, because I do this one every year. Okay? It can start in one community. Our village, Ajijic, demonstrates that starting with one solar system can lead to a solar energy transition for an entire area, the rooftop revolution. Don and Pia Aitken in 2007 created the first house and office in the area with solar energy for all electricity and water heating. And then here we go. Oh, that's my organic garden too. Okay, 2007, there's our house. 2008, you've seen it before, but watch what it does. 2008, we got 4 houses and 3 other people who came in. 2009, people began to realize the economic benefit of getting off the DAC rate and putting in solar, and we had 17. 2010, we had 30 solar houses. 2011, 200. 2012, 350. 2013, over 500. I shouldn't have the word so far. And we don't know, but we're pretty confident that we're about to that point. We think we're around 1,000 houses. Now, on a measure of installed solar energy per capita, Ajijic and the Chapala lakeside area is now the solar capital of the entire country of Mexico. Very proud of the place. Now, here's partly what made it happen. There's our house. Here's the cost of solar panels. That's what Pia and I paid for our 1.5 kilowatt, $17,000 solar system in 2007. This is what you are paying today for your 1.5 kilowatt, $7,000 PV system, $10,000 less than we paid. And it's because of this amazing decline in costs. Now, I was going to do this, but I want to wait till the lights are on. Will all of the solar homeowners here please stand up and be acknowledged? Hold it till the lights turn on, and then I want you to be acknowledged. It was amazing last year that half the audience stood up. Part 7, to conclude, it's often the most innocent who suffer the most from global warming and climate change. Here's a sweet and often overlooked, local example. You all know about these beautiful things, the monarch butterflies. The plight of Mexico's monarch butterflies. Beautiful. They gather in the trees at night and they flutter their wings in order to regulate the temperature of the whole group hanging on the tree. And the migrations are amazing. The migrations down from the U.S. into Mexico take 4 generations. Each generation lasts about 6 weeks. And that's the lifespan of the monarchs coming down. But the return migration, the monarchs suddenly manage to get a 6-month lifespan, and it is a single generation that returns all the way back up. It's a phenomenal. You see these little things fluttering, and a little puff of wind comes, and they go boom, and you wonder how they can get anywhere. Scientists are starting to cite climate change as a growing concern for the monarch butterflies. Extreme weather events, from summer heat and drought to bigger storms, are impacting monarch populations. And several studies suggest climate change could alter the delicate balance of monarch migrations and habitats. According to Monarch Watch, the number of monarchs that overwinter in the forests of Mexico declined this year by nearly 60%, representing the smallest estimated monarch population since scientists began tracking these winter colonies in '75. I got to finish quickly before those go on. One of the wonderful monarch breeding cages designed and built by Have Hammers in Riveras, and I'm sorry, it's fuzzy, I didn't take another picture. And so you put the little white eggs are attached to the milkweed, and you put it in the box, and it hatches out, and the caterpillars come out and eat the milkweed you gave them. P and I have joined with other Ajijic residents to help out at least a little bit. And here's the magic that takes place. It is magic. And the first one that we had came out, and she had to dry her wings, so she crawled up on the edge of the box. And she'd flutter her wings, and then she'd try to fly, and she'd fly and go down into the grass. So then I just put my finger out, she'd climb on the finger, and sit there, and she'd dry her wings and dry her wings. And then she would flutter down again. And one of them fluttered over and landed on Pia, and sat there for a long time, slowly removing her wings until she was ready to fly, and then she flew off. And the wonderful thing for us is they were completely unafraid of us. They somehow knew. You could reach out with your hand and get them and everything. That was wonderful. Well, what do we do now? We start this way. And this is a remarkable device. The incredible brain processes 150 million gigabytes a minute. Our incredible brain stores data equivalent to 194 miles of CD-ROMs. We've now reached the critical crossing on the way toward a responsible energy future. Power plant road, cemetery lane for the economy and the environment if we do, solar in the background. It's a real crossing in Aspen, Colorado. Aren't we obligated to start the renewable energy transition now? Each generation sharing in the heritage of the earth has a duty as trustee for future generations to prevent irreversible and irreparable harm to life on earth and to human freedom and dignity. Jacques Cousteau. We mustn't wait until the wheels come off of our present energy policy to start the transition to a new, better, and more sustainable policy. Pretty awkward moment, actually. We mustn't get mired in old energy policies or equally mired down in political disagreements over new ones. We mustn't get blindly stuck in our present energy systems. I guess you can still see that. Big picture, home sweet home. What is the good of having a nice house without a decent planet to put it on? Henry David Thoreau. A vision of a better and greener Mexico and world for them. We really are holding the fate of the earth in our own hands. About 100 years of fossil fuels left, 5.5 billion years of sunshine left. Please choose wisely and think it. Son, will all the solar homeowners please stand up? Stand up. Don't be shy. Stand up. Stand up. Whoa!
Wow. Okay, we have time for a few questions, and if you would keep the comments minimum, but the questions will. Please stand.
I'm not sure what that is. Keep that on. We will have to turn the questions off no later than 1:45, because we have another engagement. But that gives us another 15, 20 minutes for questions. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for a great talk.
Thank you.
I have two questions. Any information you can give us on programs being developed by institutions that clean up carbon, take it out of the atmosphere or the oceans? And the second one is, I heard once that silicon goes into solar panels, and there might be some problem with the amount of silicon needed for this type of thing. Could you clear that? Thank you.
The second part of the question is silicon is the most abundant element in the surface of the earth. So that answers the second part. And the first part, Dave, I'm tired. Tell me again. Oh, yeah, what they call the geotechnical solutions. People are talking about that, having what amounts to giant vacuum cleaners, suck the air out, strip the carbon, do something with the carbon, they don't know what to do with it yet, and return the air. And when you look at the geotechnical solutions for all of the atmosphere for the whole Earth, they're very, very doubtful that they would make any sense economically or technically. What we have to do is to reduce the amount going in. We don't think we'll be able to really pull much out. Next. Hey, Bob.
Hello there. Great talk as always. With shale oil extraction, you have this decrease in oil prices. We know that that's likely to undercut efforts for alternative energy. What sorts of projections are there, or have they been modeled well enough to know?
I hate to disagree with a friend of mine, but the fact is that wind and solar are used to make electricity. And only 1% of the electricity in the United States is made from oil. So 99% of our electricity production is not touched whatsoever by the changing price of oil. So all of the economic evidence is it won't make any difference at all to our renewable energy policies. It's really a wonderful result, and I'm glad you asked the question.
Many of us are renters.
Our what?
Renters.
Oh,
We
yes.
don't own our home.
Renters, renters.
No, renters.
Renters.
Sorry.
I got it.
All right. And so, is there a way to buy just a couple of panels so that when you moved, you could take them with you?
The answer is, the answer is yes. I really disagree with very complicated racks that are going up. In some cases they are, but in every case, even the racks that are going up are just bolted into the roof. If you can get the concurrence of the person who owns the house, and he or she will probably require that you remove that ugly stuff which is not ugly, when you move out. Yes, indeed, it's really very straightforward to dismantle all of the parts. The panels are just clipped onto the mount. Just unclip them and yank the wires out and take them off. So yes, you can take it with you.
Thank you, this was fascinating. I know I'm better off walking from
Oh,
here.
straight at it, a little closer.
Oh, thank you. I know I'm better off walking for a lot of reasons, but when I do need a car, am I better off having a car that has high mileage or using an electric car that causes coal to be burned?
That's a very interesting question, and I actually had a section that I just decided I didn't have time to, showing pictures of my own electric car in the United States and all sorts of fun that we had with it. But it's a good question, that if you drive an electric car and the electricity comes from a coal-burning power plant, you are worse off than you are driving a 40 mile per gallon little car on gasoline. It's a good question. But in general, with the energy mix that we have, like in California, which is a very clean energy mix, electric cars are great winners. We had one for 5 years. I'd love to have one here, but here, you know, all the electric cars, and there are now maybe 30 manufacturers selling them, are like in the $30,000, $40,000 range. And they're really pushing them because people want to go at least 100 miles. I live 3 miles out of town. And most of the time I bicycle into town, all right, and you walk. But to go to Chapala or something, if I could get a little cheap one for like $10,000 or no more, and it has a 20-mile range, it'd be perfect for this area. And so what we did with our solar system is sized to provide for our house and offices right now. But the number of panels is, I'm ready to put another row in. If I can get an electric car, I'm going to slap up the other row. And then it will charge my electric car. So we would like to do it. Anyone else? I see one here.
Yeah, one right here.
Okay. We'll learn to see here.
You didn't mention wave power.
No. I didn't mention the ones that are not being developed in large scale right now. Geothermal's been around for a long time. Mexico has a lot of geothermal. I showed a picture of it actually, just briefly. It was one of those things when I showed all the sources that Mexico has. And geothermal in Mexico is very important. Wave power is still in a very experimental state. And where it's working and where they're trying it off the coast of Scotland, for example, it's terribly expensive. So the waves themselves, they don't have what we call high energy density. I know the waves come in, and the wave power things are basically pistons. And the wave lifts them up, and then they go down on the wave, and a piston falls down, and then is lifted up and falls down. Unbelievably inefficient. A fraction of 1% efficiency. And so it's going to take quite a while. Tidal power is much better, and they should develop that more.
I would like to ask you, are you in contact with the Mexican government? Did you have a chance to present them your studies?
Do I tell the story? Oh, God. In 2006, I had been president of the American Solar Energy Society, and I authored a report that was called Transitioning to Renewable Energy Future, that was translated into many languages, and the European Union adopted quite a bit of it. And I was very well known. And they translated it into Spanish. And they invited, so the government of Mexico City invited P and me down. And to make a presentation on that, and that one they were going to, then after that they were going to give a copy of the Spanish version to every legislator in the government. And so it came time to give the talk. Huge room. And it came time to give the talk. Nobody. And we waited for an hour, and we waited for an hour and a half, And finally some people dribbled in. But I was told that the secretaries of energy and everybody, they were all going to come. And they're all going to bring all their own people. Nobody. Then in came the Secretary of Agriculture. He walked up, grabbed the microphone, and said, "You need to understand that we make our energy in Mexico from oil and gas and not this nonsense stuff of solar and other click." And he walked off, and we learned later that the government had basically been told, "Don't you dare bring your people to that talk." And that was the only time that I really could do it. I've been a keynote speaker at some international conferences, including 2 years ago in Guadalajara. That's when I first presented my 10-sector map for renewable energy. And the Secretary of Energy was there. And I went up later, and I had very carefully copied out the main slides. And I gave him the report and talked to him a bit. He said, "Oh, I'll be very happy to read it, da-da-da." And that's that. We're really not getting anywhere. And what's happening in Mexico, the solar conversion now, where the industry is finding out they can save money by doing solar. We're finding out we can save money by doing solar. And then wind developers now are being allowed more liberally to come in. That's really the way it's going to happen in Mexico. Eventually, I would hope that the government will really pay more attention. I don't want to be critical of my country here.
I know you're I know you're talking about renewable, and I know this is probably a dirty word for a lot of people in this auditorium, but could you give me your 20-word argument, pro and con, well balanced, about nuclear?
Yeah, well, it just so happens. It just so happens. Let's see. There. Just so happens. I parked a few slides in case that question came up. You believe nuclear energy is the answer? I did this last year. As a proportion of all electricity generated globally, nuclear peaked in 1993 at 17% and has now fallen to 10%. So 10% of the electricity in the world is from nuclear now. It's going down, not up. The average age of operating plants is increasing, with a number over 40 years old. Currently 31 plants set to grow quite rapidly. Just maintaining nuclear energy's share of 19% of electricity production in the United States will require adding several dozen new ones just to maintain the share. Each will take some 10 years and $5 billion to construct. Right now, natural gas and wind power are more economic than nuclear power in the Midwestern electricity market, said Howard Lerner. It's a matter of economic competitiveness. The utilities are not going to nuclear. Why do that? It's cheaper for them to build gas-fired power plants. It's cheaper for them to run the gas-fired power plants. And let's see if I have one more here. U.S. nukes insure the tax-paying public up to $13 billion per accident. Fukushima cost the Japanese $500 billion. If this had been the U.S., the American taxpayers would have had to cough up the $487 billion difference. So there are a lot of things working against our ability, even if you favor nuclear power. The nuclear industry itself agrees with these numbers and has said that we cannot increase the percentage in the United States, and it's going to be very difficult just to keep up with the 19% that we have. Now, globally, we're seeing it go in China and India and other places. We're seeing expansion of nuclear power. But I don't think we will ever, because of the economics, see it lessen in the range of 10% of electricity production in the world.
Speaking of nuclear power, one thing you don't hear much about anymore is another form of nuclear power. What's the status of research on nuclear fusion?
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, nuclear fusion has been having a bad year. 40 years ago, they said nuclear fusion is just 40 years away, and this year they say nuclear fusion is 40 years away. And there have been no successes yet at all. They're building what's called the ITER project, where the United States is part of it. It's a huge $16 billion project for fusion in France. And many countries are taking part of it. And it's using what they call the magnetic containment way, where you take a plasma, which is an electrified gas, if you will, and squeezing it until it gets so hot, which is many millions of degrees, that it will fuse. And there's never been success with that. If they do have success, it will be with something about this big. And they will be putting much more energy into it than they'll get out. And then they have to somehow figure out how to make that into a power plant with these incredible magnets. The other approach is the plasma approach, and they did that at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. And they built the biggest, not plasma, I'm blanking here, the name. Laser, I'm sorry, thank you very much. I told you it's my name. They built the world's biggest laser in Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. And what they did is then they put a pellet about 1 millimeter wide in a target, and they had 20 guns, 20 laser guns, all focused. And the idea is when you turn the lasers on, all the beams come in, simultaneously hit that pellet of deuterium, raise it up over 1 million degrees, and it will fuse. And that would be the beginning. The first question is, well, if it did, then what? I mean, how are you going to make that into a 1,000 megawatt plant, or even a 100 megawatt plant? But the second thing is it didn't work. It's an enormous disappointment for them. And what they found by taking pictures very carefully is when the lasers hit that little pellet of deuterium, instead of saying absolutely round, and it has to be absolutely round, right? Because you're compacting it. It has to be absolutely spherical. You're compacting it. It loses its spherical shape and goes up like that, and becomes lumpy. And consequently, it's not being uniformly packed. It's not rising in temperature. It's an extraordinary failure. And as I speak today, they don't have the slightest idea what they're going to do with that project, where to go, how to solve the problem. So technically, it's got a long, long way to go. And by the time, if it ever looks like it's going to be pretty economic, we really aren't going to need it. I mean, if we can do the renewable energy transition for the world by 2070, why put all of that money into those huge power plants which employ just a few people there, whereas our renewable energy employs people everywhere? So, from my answer, I anticipate you will never see nuclear fusion, but you got to be careful to say never. But I think that the strikes against it are so huge. That's not a personal opinion or whether I like it or dislike it. Just trying to share it with you.
We have time for 2 more questions back here.
Okay?
Don, thank you, obviously. A wonderful discussion. Okay, if you could just highlight the importance of problems of ministries talking to each other, both energy and environmental. I'm a retired officer from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. And the problem has been that we have very underappreciated efforts, underfunded efforts to try to help countries with climate mitigation and climate preparation, because the change is very real and agriculture is extremely effective. But trying to get ministries together to try to talk and come to agreements and to help countries get environmental policies in place such that energy can be viewed as renewable and so on. I know you're an expert in that, so you could say a point.
Well, it's obviously it's extremely difficult. What they're doing, what they did last year already with the meeting that they had, I mentioned in Warsaw, is they pledged $100 billion a year to nations to help them develop the infrastructure. And they're hoping to go up. The nations are asking for like 400 or 500 billion. That's a lot of money. But it's the sum total from all of the developed nations to try to use money to say, look, if you guys get serious about it, we're going to help pay for it. You start agriculture and electricity development and all that, start talking to each other. But mostly it takes fairly enlightened people. In Germany, it's amazing. What was his name? Our one guy in Germany who triggered the whole thing, who died recently. Anyway, that's the story. There's one fellow in the Senate in Germany who said we really can and should go into solar energy because look what it does for our economy. And he himself managed to trigger what then became the world's greatest application of solar energy in a country where the climate is equivalent to Seattle, Washington. It only has half the sunshine per day on the average that we do here in Mexico. And yet Germany has done extraordinary things with it, all triggered by one person. So I guess all we can hope is that we can get the enlightened people in government who can begin to make a difference. And I know that's not easy.
What will be the requirement on fossil fuels to manufacture solar panels and windmills?
The fossil fuel requirement on solar panels, you have glass on it, so that you heat stuff, so you make the glass. On some of them, you have aluminum frames, but they now realize that the aluminum frames are very energy intensive, so you're now getting frameless. So you don't have the frame, so you just have the glass. And so you're asking a question that we call energy payback. How long does the photovoltaic panel have to run until it has produced as much energy as society had to use to make the panel? And the thin film panels that we have now, such as E2 Energias from Guadalajara, one of the two big ones, eSun Energy and E2 Energias are the two really big ones that have installed so much. E2 Energias uses thin film ones from panels from Japan, and the payback is about 1 year. So it takes about 1 year of running before it's produced, and then it has a 25-year warranty lifetime. So for 24 years, the panel continues to be a net producer of energy into society. The crystalline that eSun uses and that we have in our house can take anywhere from 3 to 5 years payback. They're getting thinner and thinner now. So they're down toward the range of 3 years of the panels running. We've used ours now for 7 years. So we're clearly in the net payback thing. I might mention about wind turbines as well. Wind turbines, these giant steel things, steel towers and big fiberglass blades and everything like that, have a 3-month energy payback. You run those things in 3 months, they produced as much energy as it took to make all the fiberglass, all the steel, and they're net producers. So that's a very good question, because what you want is our new energy devices to be net producers to society, as well as producing jobs, as well as helping us with our environmental problems. Okay?
Thank you. I just marvel the extraordinary amount of work that was put into this and has been going on for so long. Today you don't have to pick up your chairs and stack them. I know Don and Pia have an engagement they need to go to, so I don't know how much time they'll have for individual questions. Remember, next week, the Russians are coming back with the Solar Age. We'll meet back at LCS. Remember to turn back on your cell phones. Thank you very much for attending. See you next week.